They made us laugh. They made us feel at home. But behind the black and white charm of the Munsters lurked real-life tragedies more haunting than any monster on screen. From secret heartbreaks to hidden battles with addiction, illness, and fame's cruel edge, the cast's off-screen lives were anything but a fairy tale. What really happened when the cameras stopped rolling? Let's uncover the untold stories behind America's favorite monster family. Fred Gwynne as Herman Munster. He was the gentle giant who made America laugh, towering, lovable, unforgettable. But behind Herman Munster's goofy grin lived a man whose real life held more heartbreak than any episode ever revealed. Fred Gwynne, the 6'5" actor who turned a stitched-up monster into a national treasure, carried wounds far deeper than Hollywood ever saw. Born into a fractured childhood and marked early by loss, Fred grew up learning to hide pain behind humor, a skill that would later define his iconic performance. On screen, he was the unshakable pillar of the monster family. Off-screen, he quietly battled tragedies no father should face: a child lost before the age of 2, another born with severe disabilities, and a long marriage slowly eroded by grief and pressure. Yet Fred never stopped creating. Long after the Munsters, he delivered some of his most haunting work in Pet Sematary and stole the show as the unforgettable judge in My Cousin Vinny. But just as he found peace with his second wife, cancer struck without mercy, taking him only days before his 67th birthday. In the end, the man who made millions smile chose to be buried in an unmarked grave, as if he wanted the world to remember Herman Munster, not the suffering man beneath the makeup. Fred Gwynne's story is a bittersweet reminder that even the biggest, brightest characters can hide the deepest shadows, and sometimes the kindest hearts belong to the ones quietly breaking. Yvonne DiCarlo as Lily Munster. She was elegance in black lace, the Gothic goddess who held the Munsters together with icy grace and a mother's warmth. As Lily Munster, Yvonne DiCarlo mesmerized viewers with her regal presence, but off-screen, her life was more tragic than any Hollywood script could capture. What does it really cost to wear the crown of television royalty? Before becoming America's favorite vampire matriarch, Yvonne was already a Hollywood icon. Dubbed the Queen of Technicolor, she dazzled in biblical epics and seductive roles. But glamour faded fast when real life hit hard. Her husband, stuntman Bob Morgan, was crushed in a horrific accident on set, left permanently disabled. With the bills piling up, Yvonne took the role of Lily not for fame, but for survival. What seemed like a career move was actually a lifeline. She wore the widow's veil with strength, supporting her injured husband and children through years of quiet sacrifice. But the strain broke her marriage, and by the time she finally found peace, her health was already unraveling. Strokes, heart trouble, and a body worn down by decades in the spotlight. Even so, fans never forgot her. From the 10 Commandments to the Munsters, Yvonne DiCarlo's legacy was eternal. She passed in 2007, cremated without fanfare, like a final curtain closing in silence. But we still see her every time Lily Munster sweeps through that cobwebbed mansion with deadly grace and a mother's stare. Beverly Owen as Marilyn Munster. She was the only normal one in a house full of Munsters, the sweet blonde niece who never understood why people screamed at her family. But behind Marilyn Munster's innocent smile was a real-life tragedy, just as haunting as any horror story. Why did Beverly Owen disappear after only 13 episodes? In 1964, at just 27, Beverly lit up the screen with a soft grace that made her stand out in the chaos of the Munsters. But fame wasn't what she was chasing. Love was. At the height of her rising stardom, she shocked everyone by leaving the show to marry TV producer John Stone. To some, it was a romantic leap of faith. To others, it was a heartbreaking surrender of a promising career. But the dream crumbled. After a decade of marriage, Beverly was left divorced, financially strained, and raising 2 daughters alone. The woman who once brought warmth to a family of Munsters now faced the cold, hard truth of regret. She tried to rebuild, returning to school and earning a master's degree in American history, stepping permanently away from the spotlight she once brightened. When she passed away in 2019 after a painful battle with ovarian cancer, it wasn't with cameras flashing, but in quiet dignity, surrounded by loved ones. There was no public memorial, no Hollywood tribute, just silence. So what happened to the girl who once made Munsters seem lovable? Butch Patrick as Eddie Munster. He was the baby werewolf with a widow's peak and a mischievous grin, America's favorite monster kid. As Eddie Munster, Butch Patrick didn't just steal scenes, he stole hearts. For 70 episodes, he was the adorable chaos engine at the center of the Munster household. But child stars shine fast, and fade even faster. Butch was just 11 when the Munsters made him famous. But behind the fangs and fur was a boy thrust into an adult world, contracts, cameras, and a fame he never asked for. When the show ended, the spotlight vanished almost overnight, and what remained was a teenager with no map, no role, and a growing darkness. The years that followed were brutal. Addiction to drugs and alcohol swallowed him through the 70s and 80s. His career stalled, money ran dry, and in 2010, just when life seemed to hit bottom, he was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. But he fought back. Rehab, recovery, remission. Butch clawed his way out of the abyss. He returned to fan conventions, leaned into nostalgia, embraced the Eddie Munster legacy that once haunted him. Today, he's still here, older, scarred, but unbroken. Eddie Munster never grew up on screen, but Butch Patrick did, the hard way. And maybe that's the real story, when the makeup comes off and the lights go out. Can a little monster find his way back to being human? Al Lewis as Grandpa Munster. He was the wild card, the comic spark. Grandpa Munster, the zany vampire with a mad scientist's grin and a magician's heart. But Al Lewis, the man behind the cape, was far more complex than the laugh tracks ever let on. Off-screen, he wasn't just battling monsters. He was fighting time, truth, and the fear of being forgotten. Born Abraham Meister, Al built his fame on mischief. Yet behind the jokes and oversized eyebrows was a man crafting his own legend. He famously lied about his birth year, shaving more than a decade off his age to fit his old man persona, turning Grandpa into more than a character, but a carefully constructed myth. His personal life was equally tangled, a broken first marriage, 3 sons, and years of public feuds. But in his later years, he found love again, and then devastating illness. A series of vascular surgeries took his leg and several toes, but never his spirit. Even while wheelchair-bound, he launched a bold campaign for New York governor at 75, refusing to fade quietly into Hollywood's past. Al Lewis lived loud, rebelled louder, and when death came in 2006, he left without a grave marker or final spotlight, a final mystery, just like the life he lived. Grandpa Munster may have brewed potions and conjured laughs, but Al's real magic was his refusal to be ordinary. Behind every wild cackle was a man daring the world to underestimate him, and laughing when they did. Paul Lynde as Dr. Edward Dudley. He came, cracked a line, and vanished. Just one episode, just one role. But Paul Lynde didn't need a spotlight to leave a mark. As Dr. Edward Dudley in The Munsters, he delivered his signature wit like a hidden blade, sharp and unexpected. It was classic Lynde, brief, brilliant, and just a little heartbreaking if you looked too closely. Born in Ohio, raised on loss, Paul carried the weight of a brother killed in World War II and a secret he was never allowed to say out loud. As a gay man in 1960s Hollywood, he lived a double life. On screen, he was flamboyant, hilarious, impossible to ignore. Off-screen, he battled alcoholism, loneliness, and the suffocating pressure to hide who he really was. He shined in Hollywood squares, made magic in Bewitched, and stole scenes wherever he went. But behind the cackle was a man slowly burning out. In 1982, Paul Lynde died in his sleep at just 55. No spotlight, no grand exit, just quiet. Sometimes, it's not how long you stay. It's what you leave behind. How many jokes does it take to cover a life spent hiding? And did we ever really see the man behind the laugh? John Fiedler as Warren Bloom. He wasn't loud. He didn't dominate scenes. But when John Fiedler stepped in as Warren Bloom on the Munsters, there was something disarmingly human in the way he spoke. Soft, unsure, like he was trying to disappear in a world too big for him. It was just one episode, but his presence lingered, like a whisper that refuses to fade. Fiedler wasn't your typical Hollywood face. Short, balding, with a meek voice that would later become the beloved sound of Piglet in Winnie the Pooh, he made a career out of playing the man everyone underestimated. But off-screen, he lived the very life he often portrayed. Quiet, private, alone. He never married. No scandals, no spotlights, just decades of steady work, from 12 Angry Men to the Bob Newhart Show, until cancer took him in 2005 at the age of 80. He died in a nursing home for retired actors, his ashes scattered over Long Island. No red carpet, no headlines. Yet somehow, he stayed with us. Maybe it was that voice, trembling, kind, or the way he made silence feel like a performance. In a show filled with monsters and madness, Warren Bloom was the only one who looked like us. And maybe that's why we still remember. Not all ghosts haunt. Some just stay quietly in the back of your memory, waiting to be noticed. Jane Withers as Fanny Pike. She was once Hollywood's golden child. The little girl who could out-talk Shirley Temple and outshine a room full of adults. But when Jane Withers appeared on the Munsters in a single episode as Fanny Pike, she wasn't that bubbly kid anymore. She was older, softer, and carrying the weight of a life that fame had both built and broken. To the casual viewer, Fanny was just another quirky guest. But for those who knew Jane's story, that brief return to screen was something more, a flicker of resilience. After a meteoric rise in the 1930s, Jane disappeared from the spotlight, not because she failed, but because real life demanded more from her than any script ever had. Her first marriage crumbled under the weight of addiction and betrayal. Rheumatoid arthritis nearly took her ability to walk. Then came the most brutal blow, a second husband lost in a plane crash, and the slow, unbearable death of her child from cancer. And yet, she smiled. She taught Sunday school. She raised 5 children. She kept going. When she died in 2021 at the age of 95, it wasn't front-page news. But maybe it should have been. Because Jane Withers didn't just survive Hollywood. She survived life. What does it take to come back from that much loss? And when Fanny Pike walked into the Munsters with a spark in her eye, were we seeing a character or a woman daring the world to remember her light just one more time? Val Avery as Marty. He didn't need fangs or claws to be intimidating. Just a stare. Cold, calculated, cutting. In the Munsters, Val Avery appeared as Marty, a fleeting character whose tough demeanor left a stronger mark than most. It was a short role, but perfectly cast, because Avery had spent a lifetime playing men you didn't want to cross. Born Sibu der Abrahamian in 1924 to Armenian immigrant parents, Val Avery carved out a space in Hollywood not by chasing the spotlight, but by dominating the margins. He was the cop, the thug, the enforcer, the man who said little but meant everything. Over 100 films, hundreds of TV episodes, always the face of danger. But with that came a curse, typecasting. Avery rarely got to stretch, rarely got to be tender, broken, or soft. Hollywood gave him power on screen, but not freedom. Off-screen, tragedy struck like a silent blow. His only son died from a drug overdose, a loss that shattered his world. His wife, actress Margot Stevenson, struggled with depression in the aftermath. Their home, once a haven, became quiet with grief. And Avery, the man who had stared down gangsters and guns on film, could do nothing to stop the ache inside his own walls. He kept acting, kept showing up, even as the spark faded and roles grew thin. In 2009, at 85, Val Avery died in his Greenwich Village apartment. Quietly, like he lived. No drama, no spotlight, just a name in the credits fading to black. Marty was just another face in a monster sitcom. But Val Avery? He was the man behind the mask, carrying pain, dignity, and the heavy silence of 1,000 untold stories. And maybe the scariest thing he ever played was himself. Marge Redmond as Miss Hasset. She wasn't the kind of actress who begged for the spotlight, and that's exactly why you remember her. In the Munsters, Marge Redmond appeared briefly as Miss Hasset, a stern and stoic woman with a tightly wound presence that cut through the madness of 1313 Mockingbird Lane. Just one episode, just a few lines. But Marge had a way of making silence speak louder than words. Born in Cleveland, Ohio in 1924, she spent her life as a working actress, never quite famous, but always respected. From Broadway stages to TV classics, Marge was the kind of performer directors trusted, even when audiences didn't know her name. She stood in for legends like Angela Lansbury, earned an Emmy nomination for The Flying Nun, and became the face of Cool Whip commercials in the 1970s. But behind the calm screen presence was a woman who knew isolation. Her marriage to actor Jack Weston lasted nearly 2 decades, but ended quietly and without children. There were no scandals, no memoirs, no final curtain calls. She simply drifted away from the screen, living out her days in a modest apartment, far from Hollywood's noise. She passed in 2020, age 95, cremated, no headlines, no grand memorial. Miss Hasset may have only stayed for a scene, but Marge Redmond reminds us that sometimes the most unforgettable lives belong to those who never tried to be stars. They just showed up, delivered truth, and left before the applause even started. Gary Owens as Dick Willet. He had one of the most recognizable voices in America, deep, smooth, and laced with a wink. When Gary Owens stepped into the Munsters as Dick Willet, it wasn't the size of the role that mattered, it was the sound. With just a few lines, he gave his character a presence bigger than the screen. Because Gary didn't just speak, he resonated. Born in South Dakota in 1934, Gary made his name in radio long before TV caught up. He was the voice of Laugh In, the animated Blue Falcon, and the thunderous narrator of 1,000 shows. His signature style, one hand cupped over an ear, delivery sharp and silky, made him a legend in voiceover long before the term became trendy. But even legends fade. Behind the baritone was a man fighting a silent war with diabetes. It slowly chipped away at him, physically, emotionally, professionally. The jobs came less often. The voice stayed strong, but the body began to betray him. And while millions remembered the voice, few knew the man shrinking behind the mic. He died in 2015 at age 80, cremated, his ashes returned quietly to family. No grand farewell. Just the closing silence of a voice that once filled every room. Dick Willet was a one-episode wonder. Gary Owens was a one-in-a-million voice. And maybe that's what makes it hurt, when someone who spent a lifetime being heard disappears without a sound. Who narrates the ending when the narrator is gone?